Hello, welcome to this latest GCSE History revision video, today focusing on the Cold War. The Cold War is an unusual situation. It's a conflict between two countries. It has all of the main characteristics of a war. So it has hostility, it will have a clash of ideologies, it will have hostile words, it will have a build-up of weapons and armed forces, it will have intense propaganda against each other and espionage and spying. But crucially, it doesn't have actual fighting. That's what makes it a Cold War. The Cold War is the phrase that's used to describe the situation that exists between America and the Soviet Union, the USSR, between 1945, the end of the Second World War, and 1992, when the USSR collapsed. In many ways, it starts at the Yalta Conference, which was held between the 4th and 11th of February 1945 at Yalta, which is a small port in the Ukraine in Russia. It was a meeting of three important figures representing each of the three big countries. So we have Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the USA. We have also Winston Churchill, British Prime Minister, and Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union. It's important to remember that the war is still on. Germany has not been defeated yet. They're losing, but they're fighting hard. So part of this meeting is a military discussion. It's a chance for the Allies to discuss how they win the war, what do they do over the last few crucial months. But it's also, more importantly, a chance for them to discuss what happens after Germany has been defeated. They've already met once before at Tehran in 1943. And I think they're very aware of the mess that happened after the First World War. At the Paris Peace Conference, nobody really knew what they were doing. They didn't have any plan. They didn't have any clear model of what they were going to try and achieve. And they want to avoid that. They agreed on a number of things, actually quite quickly. They agreed that once Germany surrendered, the USSR would enter the war against Japan. They agreed that Germany would be divided into 4 separate zones, and each zone would be occupied by a foreign army. A British zone, a French zone, an American zone, and a Soviet zone. This would be important to rebuild Germany, which is in an absolute mess and is going to be even worse by the time the war is finished. Berlin, the capital city, would be in the Soviet zone, and that would be shared also. So that would also be split into 4 separate zones. They agreed that Nazi war criminals and those responsible for the Holocaust would be hunted down and punished. They agreed also that a United Nations organisation would be set up to keep peace after the war. And all three crucially agreed that they would join that and fully support it. They also agreed that as countries were freed, as countries were liberated from German control, elections would be held as quickly as possible in those countries to set up the types of government that the people in those countries wanted. They also agreed that the Soviet Union could have what they called a sphere of influence. Stalin insisted that they be allowed to have a belt of countries around them that were friendly towards them, to protect them from invasion. And that really does mean that they're going to be communist. The only real conflict at Yalta came between Churchill and Stalin. And that was over Poland. Stalin insisted that Poland must become part of the Soviet Union. Churchill would not budge on this. He said, no, the reason that Britain had entered the war in 1939 was to protect Poland, which had just been invaded by Germany. There was no way he could give to the British people the news that Poland, which they fought a war over for 6 years, is just being given away to Soviets. It's not possible. They couldn't agree at Yalta. It was a very short conference. They didn't want to be in one place for too long. And so it was the one area that was shelved and put off for later. The next conference happens on the 16th of July. It's held at Potsdam and will last until the 2nd of August. And by then, the whole context has changed. Hitler is dead. He committed suicide on the 30th of April, and Germany surrendered unconditionally on the 8th of May. So the war against Germany is over, and that changes everything. At Yalta, they had a common enemy. They had something which unified them, which brought them together. That's gone. And often when you take away a common enemy, you expose the differences between them, and that's exactly what happens here. The other thing that's changed is most of the personnel. Franklin D. Roosevelt has died. He had a brain hemorrhage and he died on the 12th of April. He's been replaced by his vice president, Harry S. Truman. And Truman's a very different character to Roosevelt. Roosevelt had some sympathy with left-wing ideas and got on very, very well with Stalin. Truman doesn't. Truman is deeply suspicious of the Soviet Union and deeply suspicious of the spread of communism. The other change happens fairly early on. Churchill is there at the beginning and is there for the first week of the conference, but there's then a general election held in Britain, which Churchill's party, the Conservative Party, loses. He is replaced by the leader of the Labour Party, the new British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee. To be honest, Attlee doesn't want to be there. He wants to be in Britain. He wants to get on with the job of rebuilding Britain. He's got no real experience of foreign affairs. He's not going to be able to deal with big heavyweights and powerful personalities like Stalin, who is still there and now sees a much more manoeuvrable position. He now sees a possibility of getting more of what he wants. The other thing that's changed greatly is that between February and July, the Soviet Union has continued to expand. The Red Army has pushed the Germans out of a number of countries in Eastern Europe. Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Albania, Hungary, Finland, Czechoslovakia and Poland. The Red Army is running those countries. And in those countries, because the Red Army are running them, because the Red Army has liberated them, communist parties are proving very, very popular. When elections are set up in those countries, as they agreed at Yalta, communist parties are probably going to win them. Truman is very worried that Stalin is just going to turn those countries into puppets. They are going to be countries that really are under the control of the Soviet Union. He's probably right there. The other thing that changes during the course of the conference is the atomic bomb. Throughout the 1940s, several countries, USA, USSR, and Germany, had been trying to create one. They sort of knew the technology and the science. It was making one that actually worked. And on the first day of the conference, the USA successfully tested an atomic bomb at a desert site in America. Truman informed Stalin of it several days later, but not immediately. He let things run for about a week before he told him. So that's in the background, that the Soviet Union have occupied most of Eastern Europe, but America's got a really, really big bomb. The conference confirmed some of the stuff that they'd agreed at Yalta. So they divided Germany, they created the United Nations, they rounded up war criminals, but they couldn't really agree on the Soviet sphere of influence and what was going to happen there, and they couldn't agree on reparations. The USSR demanded money from Germany. 20 million Russians had died during the war, and they couldn't agree on how that was going to be done. In January 1946, Truman wrote a letter to his Secretary of State in which he said, "Unless Russia is faced with an iron fist and strong language, another war is in the making. Only one language do they understand. How many army divisions have you got? I'm tired of babying the Soviets." This is a guy who's come here prepared to be tough. And there is no backing down. And the conference degenerates into a shouting match between the two. By the end of the conference, the Americans have also dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending the war against Japan but killing thousands of people. So Stalin now knows that not only do the Americans have an atomic bomb, they are also prepared to use one. The other key event to mention at this point is a speech which Winston Churchill made on the 5th of March 1946. Churchill had been invited on a tour of America and gave this speech at a place called Fulton in Missouri. And President Truman was in the audience and was sitting very close to Churchill when he looked at him. And Churchill talked about the dangers of Soviet expansion. He talked about how an iron curtain had descended across Europe. On one side of that curtain, free countries: France, Spain, Britain. On the other, countries controlled by the Soviet Union and being controlled as dictatorships. And Churchill is making a very, very clear and strong comparison between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. In October 1947, Stalin set up the Communist Information Bureau, or Cominform, which was to coordinate the work of communist parties across Eastern Europe. It would regularly bring leaders of those communist parties and those countries to Moscow to meet Stalin. It would allow him to keep an eye on them. It would allow him to coordinate their different actions so that they are all doing the same thing. The other key point to mention here is the different ideologies between the USA and the USSR. In the USSR, they believe in communism. They believe that all people are equal, but they believe that the community is more important than an individual. That means individual rights are often ignored for the safety and the security of the whole. In America, they also believe that everyone is equal, but they also believe that every individual is important. And individual competition is prized and rewarded. These are two ideologies that don't fit together. You can't have a system in which the individual is important and the situation in which the community is more important. They don't go together. And as two ideologies, they will conflict with each other. In the next video, we'll look at some more events between 1947 and 1949, which consolidate and harden this Cold War state. Thank you very much for listening.